Hello, scholars, and welcome to Lesson 1-4.2, The Black Death. It killed people. Quick review of what we've gone over in previous lesson. The Black Death was the name of one wave of plague, which struck Europe in 1347. So the disease we're talking about in general is the plague, but the Black Death refers to this one instance, this one stretch of time where it struck Europe particularly hard. This particular wave of plague is believed to have originated in Asia and arrived in two ways. It arrived in Constantinople through trade routes, and it evolved in Haifa through a Mongol invasion, siege of that city. This was where they were flinging plague-infested bodies over the city walls with catapults. It was highly contagious, it was very deadly, and it quickly spread throughout Europe. Now, on an individual level, when one plague moves from one person to another, it's caused by a transfer of this bacteria, Yersinia pestis. That bacteria lives in the stomach of fleas. If you're not familiar with a flea, this is an image of several fleas next to a dime. So you get a sense of how small these fleas were. You couldn't really track them. You couldn't see them very easily, yet they were there. This disease is kind of nasty. It gets into the flea's digestive tract. It blocks up their stomach so they can't eat really well, and they're trying to forcefully regurgitate, and what they wind up regurgitating is more bacteria. And they're starving to death because they're blocked up. So as they're chewing on your skin, trying to get at your blood, which is their food, they're also regurgitating bacteria into the hole that they've chewed into your skin. So nasty way for the flea to die, nasty way for the virus to spread. I understand you have studied evolution and Darwinism. This particular method for reproducing, the Yersinia pestis, is an evolutionary trait of the bacteria. This is how it reproduces, and if it can maximize its reproduction in that way, then it is evolutionarily successful. Now, these fleas themselves survive on rats, most of which die of the plague. They are mammals. They are suspect to the plague just the way people will be. But just like with people, some rats are resistant to the disease. They'll still be infected, but the symptoms are not as severe, and they won't die, or they'll die more slowly. But usually if you've got this disease resistance, you're going to survive it, which is actually a problem. The disease, Yersinia pestis, needs that resistance because that's how it's going to travel. So some rats being resistant, some people being resistant is good for the bacteria. Now, people are going to catch this disease. They're going to be caught. They're going to catch it because they're bit by the fleas, the same way the rats were. And then once it's in people, the bacteria can then spread person to person. Again, by fleas that get infected by biting an infected person, or another version of it, which is spread through body fluids. We're going to talk about the three different types of plague, beginning with the bubonic. The bubonic was the most common, and it was plague of the lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are a part of your lymphatic system. They're helping to protect your body against infection. This particular plague victim, you can actually see lymph nodes are swollen, and this is where the bubonic plague would most commonly strike people. It would strike them in the groin area, in the armpits, and around the neck, where we have concentrations of lymph nodes. Now, this is a disease which is very fatal. About 2/3 of medieval people who got the bubonic plague died. In some areas, that number was a little bit higher. In some areas, that number was a little bit lower. But in general, we're talking about 2/3, 2 out of every 3 people who get this disease die. It does spike as high as 4 out of every 5 in some particular climates during this plague. The other types of plague included the pneumonic plague, This was plague of the lungs. So you would get this if somebody was infected with plague, had one of those buboes burst, or in some other way a body fluid was ejected into the air, and then somebody would breathe in the moisture that had plague bacteria in it into their lungs. And then the buboes, the plague, would take root in those lungs. Really nasty way to die. Fatality rate is near 100%. There were some cases of people surviving this plague. It's slightly more survivable than the next plague we're going to talk about, but still at the time nearly 100% fatal. Now, the septismic, I'm going to go with septismic plague. This is plague of the blood. This was transferred by flea bites, but for one reason or another, the actual bacteria does not go into the lymphatic system. It stays in the circulatory system, and it will form those buboes actually in your blood vessels. This is going to stop your blood vessels from pumping. This is going to stop your heart from pumping. This is essentially 100% fatal. Once you have these buboes in your blood system, once your circulatory system shuts down, you're not going to survive that. So that was the worst form of plague you could get, but it was also the rarest of the three forms. Mortality rates. Now, most victims, once you're bit by that flea or you inhale that moisture, you're going to start to show symptoms within 2 to 5 days, and most are going to die within 2 to 7 days of the appearance of those symptoms. Generally here we're talking about 80% of those who died were dead by the 8th day after contracting the virus. So this is a very quick moving, bacteria. Very quick moving bacteria. It spreads very quickly. And generally speaking, again, 80% of those who die within 8 days. The disease generally will kill its victim between 4 and 12. Some do survive as much as 12 days, but that is not a pleasant way to go. In the 4 years that the Black Death was raging through Europe, it killed off, the best estimates are 45 to 50% of the population. I've seen numbers that go as high as 60. I've seen numbers that are as low as 30. But the number that keeps popping up in my research is this 45 to 50%. So that's the one we're going to go with in this class. Now, this is half the population of Europe. Just imagine the impact of that. That's half of all the people, half of all the farmers, half of all the townspeople. It was devastating. And it will take European population 150 years to recover that population loss. Because people, unlike this bacteria, we just don't reproduce that quickly. And it takes a while to recover. So it was pretty devastating. This is just a chart of the three forms of plague, specifically within Britain. Just saying the bubonic in this case, they're saying was about 50% in Britain, about 90% for the pneumonic, and so on. These numbers are slightly lower. We're going with 50 instead of 2/3 and 90 instead of near 100. This is partly in response to the colder climate. Areas that had a slightly colder climate were hit a little less hard by the plague, but as you can see, it was still pretty devastating. Now, surviving the plague. Some people had a natural resistance to bubonic plague. And just like with the rats, just like with the fleas, if it was 100% fatal in a very quick way with all people, then evolutionarily that's a defect. The bacteria would kill itself out through a failure to reproduce. This natural resistance among some people actually helps it to spread. Now, these people would show mild or even no symptoms. And they would be contagious. They would be walking around with this bacteria in them. Fleas would be biting them. Fleas would be transferring that to other people. It was A good thing for them individually is not all that great for society as a whole because they're walking around and spreading the plague. Now, if somebody was lucky enough to get the bubonic and to survive the bubonic plague, their immune system has now acquired skills and strategies for fighting that particular bacteria. It would significantly increase their resistance to the plague. That is, they would be far less likely to show symptoms or to become severely infected with this bacteria. But with bacterial infections, we're not talking about immunity, we're talking about resistance. The bacteria will still enter your body, it will still reproduce. It's just your body's gonna shut it down much more quickly. And so this is not immunity, this is resistance. But some people did develop this throughout the plague. They will pass this on to their descendants through subsequent waves of plague. This is the worst wave of it. Black Death is definitely the worst. But over the next 500 years, Europe is going to get hit with 9 waves of plague, some of which are really bad, some of which, death rates reach as high as 10, 12% of the population. But nothing compares to Black Death. This is really the game changer. More on the Black Death next time. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in class.